Hello, and welcome to English for Philosophy students. We are studying the book of 12 Rules for Life by Jordan Peterson. This is lesson number 70, and it is the first lesson in chapter 8, entitled Tell the Truth, or at least Don't Lie. Let's get right into it. I'm going to read. Truth in No Man's Land. I trained to become a clinical psychologist at McGill University in Montreal. While doing so, I sometimes met my classmates on the grounds of Montreal's Douglas Hospital, where we had our first direct experiences with the mentally ill. The Douglas occupies acres of land and dozens of buildings. Many are connected by underground tunnels to protect workers and patients from the interminable Montreal winters. The hospital once sheltered hundreds of long-term in-house patients. This was before antipsychotic drugs and the large-scale deinstitutionalization movements of the late 60s all but closed down the residential asylums, most often dooming the now freed patients to a much harder life on the streets. By the early 80s, when I first visited the grounds, all but the most seriously afflicted residents had been discharged. Those who remained were strange, much damaged people. They clustered around the vending machines, scattered throughout the hospital's tunnels. They looked as if they had been photographed by Diane Arbus or painted by Hieronymus Bosch. Let's go to the beginning. I'll have a few comments for your English. No man's land. No man's land is a general term for a place uninhabitable. A bad place. I think here it is a reference in the first paragraph to the asylum. Okay, he says, I trained to become a clinical psychologist at McGill University in Montreal. While doing so, I sometimes met my classmates on the grounds of Montreal's Douglas Hospital, where we had our first direct experiences with the mentally ill. Sometimes we use an article like the to talk about a group of people. The disenfranchised, the mentally ill, the elderly. It refers to the community of people who share that characteristic. And here we have the Douglas. Apparently, this hospital, Montreal's Douglas Hospital, is commonly referred to the Douglas. It's a nickname for that hospital by the people who live there. The Douglas occupies acres of land and dozens of buildings. So it's a huge hospital. Many, meaning many buildings, are connected by underground tunnels to protect workers and patients from the interminable Montreal winters. Interminable means it goes on forever and is unpleasant. Forever and unpleasant. Interminable. The hospital once sheltered hundreds of long-term in-house patients. Now, As a native speaker, I see a foreshadowing of Jordan Peterson's personal opinion on the politics of how we treat the mentally ill in this sentence. The hospital once, meaning once upon a time, in the good old days, once does not always have a positive connotation, but it does have it sometimes. So once, it sheltered hundreds of long-term in-house patients. The word sheltered has a distinctly positive connotation. Sheltering is something you do when you are protecting someone. It's what parents do to their children. It is benevolent. So, in the past, the hospital sheltered hundreds of long-term in-house patients. Now, a long-term in-house mental patient is a person who has been committed to stay in that asylum. Committed in this context means involuntarily, without consent. The family of the mentally ill person forced the mentally ill person to go to this hospital, and long-term means essentially indefinitely, which means essentially forever. So it's like a life sentence. So back in the day, mentally ill people could be placed in a facility like this against their will because their family felt it was in their best interest, or maybe their family just didn't want to deal with them. And then they would be cared for in these facilities for the rest of their lives. And this was before antipsychotic drugs and the large-scale deinstitutionalization movement of the late 60s. So in the 1960s, two things happened that drastically changed the philosophy of caring for elderly people. One, they developed antipsychotic drugs. So people who had been just crazy in the past, with these drugs, they got a little bit better. And maybe were not such a danger to others. And then also, the 1960s was the time of civil rights, where everybody was being liberated. And at that time, there was a movement, a lot of people got the idea that we should de-institutionalize the mentally ill. Now, when you see a huge word like this, if you cannot read it, what you need to do is break it up into syllables. So we have D, which means negate or change, reverse, D, institutionalization. Institutionalization movement. If you institutionalize someone, you put them in an institution, like an asylum. Institutionalization is the practice of putting people into institutions. Deinstitutionalization is reversing that and taking people out. Actually, deinstitutionalization was also not voluntary. They emptied the mental hospitals and just put all the people out, and a large portion of those people ended up homeless on the streets. Many, many. But that was what they did at that time. So you get the impression that Jordan Peterson maybe didn't think this was so good. But at any rate, it is a fact of history that the mental hospitals were emptied out in the 1960s in the United States. I don't know about Brazil. Okay, so I'm going to start back at the hospital. The hospital once sheltered hundreds of long-term in-house patients. Crazy people. This was before antipsychotic drugs and the large-scale deinstitutionalization movements of the late 60s all but closed down the residential assignments. All but. That phrase means they almost completely did the thing that follows. So what follows? Closed down the residential asylums. So they all but closed them down. That means they almost closed every single one and put them out of existence. Almost. Not quite, but almost. That's what all but. Okay. So the deinstitutionalization movements and the onset or the advent of antipsychotic drugs caused the emptying of residential asylums. Residential is places where people live. Asylums is like, institutional houses for the mentally ill. Okay. So, Jordan Peterson trained to become a clinical psychologist at the Douglas Hospital before the patients were turned out onto the streets. That means the patients were there when he arrived as a student. Okay? So I'm going to read this sentence again. This was before antipsychotic drugs and large-scale deinstitutionalization movements of the late 60s all but closed down. Closed down means put them out of business. Closed down the residential asylums, most often dooming the now freed patients to a much harder life. So you can compare the word dooming, which has a very negative connotation, with the word sheltered. Once upon a time, we sheltered the mentally ill, but the do-gooder liberals in the 1960s wanted to free the patients. By freeing the patients, and he uses these quotation marks to show that he doesn't mean free literally, he means it ironically. The freed patients were doomed. No longer were they sheltered, now they are doomed to a much harder life on the streets. On the streets means homeless. By the early 1980s, first part of the 1980s, when I first visited the grounds, all but the most seriously afflicted had been discharged. Okay, so when Jordan came about, it must have been around the time of deinstitutionalization, because all had been discharged. Discharged means put out on the streets. And all but the most seriously afflicted. But means except. So everybody except the most seriously mentally ill people had been kicked out of the residential. So when he got there, people weren't really living there except the seriously mentally ill. Those who remained were strange, much damaged people. They clustered around the vending machines. Clustered gives you a picture almost of insects or animals huddling close to the vending machines. That's somewhere you can get potato chips or crackers or a candy bar or a soda, which are very small pleasures. And yet the people clustered. They huddled around these because they are very seriously mentally ill. They clustered around the vending machines scattered throughout the hospital's tunnels. So they had vending machines all over the place, and the patients congregated around the vending machines. They looked as if they had been photographed by Diane Arbus or painted by Hieronymus Bosch. I don't know these artists. Probably Diane Arbus and Hieronymus Bosch must be famous for photographing or painting a certain kind of person. You can look that up. I'll look it up after the class. One day, my classmates and I were all standing in line. We were awaiting further instruction from the straight-laced German psychologist who ran the Douglas Clinical Training Program. A long-term inpatient, fragile and vulnerable, approached one of the other students, a sheltered conservative young woman. The patient spoke to her in a friendly, childlike manner and asked, "Why are you all standing here? What are you doing? Can I come with you?" My classmate turned to me and asked uncertainly, "What should I say to her?" She was taken aback, just as I was, by this request coming from someone so isolated and hurt. Neither of us wanted to say anything that might be construed as a rejection or a reprimand. Back to the top. One day, my classmates and I were all standing in line. Notice, my classmates and I. In speech, many times people say, "Me and my classmates were doing something." That is grammatically incorrect. However, it is common in speech, but it is never okay in writing. In writing, you must always put I last. So it's my classmates and I were doing something. So it could be a list of people. Mary, Martha, Joseph, Jeremy, and I were going for a walk. You always put I last. Also, the question of should it be I or me has to do with whether it is in the subject or in the object case. So in this case, I was standing in line. I am the subject of the sentence. So my classmates and I. If I were the object of the action, for example, if it was someone gave a book to me, then you would say someone gave a book to my classmates and me. Self is always last, and it must be in the proper case, grammatically, if you are in writing. In speech, people often don't do that. Okay, one day, my classmates and I were all standing in line. That means they were waiting somewhere, in a line, but waiting, doing nothing. We were awaiting further instruction, so they were waiting for further instruction. Awaiting combines the words waiting for something. Awaiting something. We were awaiting further instruction from the straight-laced German psychologist. Straight-laced means he is strict. He has rules and requires you to keep them. Everything must be proper and correct. Straight-laced German psychologist who ran the Douglas Clinical Training Program. A long-term inpatient, fragile and vulnerable. Notice, fragile and vulnerable describes the long-term inpatient. A long-term inpatient who was fragile and vulnerable approached one of the other students, a person standing in line with Jordan Peterson, a clinical psychology student. Approached one of the other students, a sheltered, conservative young woman. This describes the student. So notice the grammar of what goes with what. The inpatient, fragile and vulnerable. The student, sheltered, conservative young woman. Sheltered means the individual does not have much experience in the world. It means she never saw crime, never experienced trauma. She has maybe only seen one kind of people, maybe a religious community that her family was part of, and she is innocent. So young people who are brought up carefully and protected by their parents are sheltered. This can be good or bad, but in this context, it definitely means she doesn't know what to do when confronted by a difficult situation that is outside her experience. Sheltered is a characteristic of innocence. And then a conservative young woman. Conservatives tend to dress modestly, believe in God, not smoke and drink and have sex outside marriage. Conservative. Young woman. The patient spoke to her in a friendly, childlike manner. We have two words in English that are very similar, but they have completely different connotations. One of them is childish, and the other is childlike. Childlike is entirely positive. It means innocent and vulnerable and sweet. Childish reflects the negative aspects of small children. Demanding, selfish, rude, throw a temper tantrum, scream in your face. That's childish. So childlike is positive. Okay. The patient spoke to her in a friendly, that's also positive, friendly, childlike manner, and asked, "Why are you all standing here? What are you doing? Can I come along with you?" All very sweet and innocent. My classmate turned to me and asked uncertainly, "What should I say to her?" Now the question is, why can't you just speak to her like a human being? Well, she's crazy. She's a patient and you're going to be a doctor. There's a professional distance. And you have a straight-laced German clinician watching your every move. And there must be a protocol. Or maybe just, I don't want this patient. This patient cannot come with us. So how do I reject her? I don't want to make her feel bad. So the girl, the student, was uncertain. What should I say? She, meaning the clinical student, was taken aback. Taken aback means surprised. So she was surprised, just as I was, by this request coming from someone so isolated and hurt. So I guess taken aback is a little different from surprised. But it does sort of mean it was unexpected, this request from a patient. Coming from someone so isolated and hurt. So the patient is isolated. The patient doesn't have any friends. The patient is alone and afraid and hurt in general. And the Jordan and the other student are like taken aback by a request from this person. By this request. A request is asking for something. And what's she asking for? She's asking, can I come along with you? Can I join you? Can I stay with you? Neither of us, meaning not Jordan nor the student, neither nor, not Jordan nor the student, neither of them wanted to say anything that might be construed as a rejection or a reprimand. Might be construed means might be misunderstood. In this case, misunderstood. They didn't want to say anything that a reasonable person would take as a rejection or a reprimand, like, go away, don't speak to me. That's a reprimand. How dare you speak to someone like me? That would be a reprimand. And a rejection is just, no, we don't like you, go away. They did not want to communicate rejection or reprimand, and they didn't want anything they said to give this idea, even through misunderstanding. So they wanted to be careful what they said. Next paragraph. We had temporarily entered a kind of no man's land in which society offers no ground rules or guidance. We were new clinical students, unprepared to be confronted on the grounds of a mental hospital by a schizophrenic patient asking a naive, friendly question about the possibility of social belonging. The natural conversational give and take between people attentive to contextual cues was not happening here either. What exactly were the rules in such a situation, far outside the boundaries of normal social interaction? What exactly were the options? Okay, so we, meaning the students, the clinical students, Jordan and the others, had temporarily entered a kind of no man's land. So he is creating the concept of a no man's land, a place. He is now defining it. He is defining a place in which society offers no ground rules or guidance. Ground rules are basic assumptions of proper behavior. One of the ground rules in society is that you are supposed to wear clothes. Another ground rule is that you're supposed to look people in the face when you speak to them in the United States. Another ground rule is that you keep a proper distance from people when you interact. So we all know the basic rules for interacting in our society. They're different in every culture, but people from childhood learn the norms of their society. Those norms are the ground rules. But this situation offered no ground rules. They did not know what would be normal, what would be acceptable, what would not give offense, what would not hurt the other person. So we were new clinical students. That means they were inexperienced, unprepared to be confronted, unprepared. So they didn't know how to respond, unprepared to be confronted on the grounds of a mental hospital by a schizophrenic patient asking a naive, friendly question about the possibility of social belonging. Each phrase carries the thought forward. So they didn't know how to react in the case of a crazy person coming up and speaking to them and asking to belong to their group. Now, you do know that if someone wants to make friends with you, there are acceptable ways to do that. In certain contexts, maybe a bar or a public place or a class or a church, you can go up to someone, you can introduce yourself, you can ask questions about general questions about their life and your life. There are accepted norms for requesting social belonging, to ask if you can join someone's group. There are ways, but not in this situation. A schizophrenic patient in a mental hospital cannot just go and simply ask to belong to the social circle of the doctors. The natural conversational give and take between people. All right, give and take is a mutual interaction where I say something, then you say something, then I say something. I listen to you, you listen to me. I ask about you, you ask about me. Give and take. Okay. The natural conversational give and take between people attentive to contextual cues. So this attentive to contextual cues modifies the people who are attentive to contextual cues. So attentive means pay attention and you can understand. Contextual cues means non-verbal communication in the context. For example, a contextual cue Might be in your body language, where you say, yes, and you open your hands and look at the person. Or a cue of closed would be this. The way you're dressed can be a contextual cue. Maybe the patients all had a certain kind of clothing and the doctors were dressed in more business or formal attire. Maybe they had a white lab coat, showing that they were part of the doctor group. That would be a contextual cue. So a patient could go up and talk to another patient, but they couldn't really go up and make friends with a doctor. So the normal conversational give and take between people who are attentive to contextual cues was not happening here either. Okay. It was not happening. Either suggests that something up here was the case. So they are unprepared to be confronted by this situation, and the normal give and take was not happening either. Neither were they prepared, nor were they assisted by a normal conversational pattern. What exactly were the rules in such a situation? Far outside the boundaries of normal social interaction? That's the question. What exactly were the options? Options means what were the choices. I could do this or that. Those are your options. He said, what even are the options in this no man's land socially, where we're unprepared, none of the normal rules apply? What should we do? Moving on. Last question was, what were the options? He goes on to say, there were only 2 options, as far as I could quickly surmise. I could tell the patient a story designed to save everyone's face, or I could answer truthfully. We can only take 8 people in our group. Would have fallen into the first category. As would have, we're just leaving the hospital right now. Neither of these answers would have bruised any feelings, at least on the surface, and the presence of the status differences that divided us from her would have gone unremarked. But neither answer would have been exactly true, so I didn't offer either. All right, so what are the options? There were only 2, as far as I could quickly surmise. So as you say, as far as I could tell, that is a way of saying, I'm not sure the statement is completely true, but it seems kind of true. So when he says there were only 2 options, as far as I can tell, he is weakening the assertion. He is saying maybe there were more options. But at that moment, quickly, in the very spur of the moment, I could only think of 2 options. I could tell the patient a story designed to save everyone's face. In this context, a story does not mean a narrative, like we think of telling a story. It means lying. I could tell the patient a lie. This is a euphemism for telling a lie. A euphemism is a phrase that makes something ugly sound a little more acceptable. So telling a story is a euphemism for telling a lie. Okay, so 2 options. I could tell a lie which was designed to save everyone's face. Save face means prevent embarrassment. Keep everyone's dignity intact. Don't embarrass anyone. That is saving face. If you lose face, You have lost your dignity and you have been shamed and embarrassed. Okay? So I could tell a lie that would make sure no one was embarrassed, or I could answer truthfully. So those are the only two chances, the only two options. Either lie or tell the truth. Pretty binary. Quote, "We can only take 8 people in our group." These quotation marks indicate that it's a sentiment that is being said, but like a speech. So that statement, which nobody said it, this is a suggestion. I have two options. I could either lie or tell the truth. If I lie, maybe I will say, we can only take 8 people in our group. That would have fallen into the first category. It would be a lie. As would have, that means also this next thing is a lie. It falls into the first category. So as would have, we are just leaving the hospital now. So both of those are lies. Neither of these answers would have bruised any feelings. So these answers, although they are lies, they would not have hurt the patient. They would not have hurt her feelings. To hurt someone's feelings is to injure the person emotionally. They wouldn't have hurt her feelings. At least on the surface. So that means maybe deep down the patient would know it was a rejection, but it would preserve a social comfort. At least on the surface, it would not hurt her feelings. And the presence of the status differences that divided us from her would have gone unremarked. So if we told either one of these two lies, feelings would not be hurt, and nobody would be talking about status difference. The truth was, you cannot join our social group because you are a patient and we are doctors, and doctors and patients cannot be social equals in a clinical relationship. That was the truth. But it's awkward and embarrassing to say, no, I'm higher than you socially, or your social status is low, or something. So the status differences that divided us from her, that made it impossible for us to belong, would have gone unremarked. Unremarked means no remark would have been made. A remark is a comment that points it out. So nobody would have said anything, remarked about anything about our status differences. If I told those lies, the fact of our status difference would be ignored. But neither answer would have been exactly true. Actually, both answers have some truth. We can only have 8 people in our group. Maybe. We're leaving shortly. Maybe. Maybe they're true, but they are not the reason that they cannot be friends with her. So on the surface, she is asking, can I come with you? On the surface, the answer is no, because we can only have 8 people. No, we're leaving and you can't leave, so no. But deeper down, she was saying, can we be friends? Can I belong? And deeper down, the answer is no, because we are doctors and you are a patient. And that relationship is not one of equality. So that's the deeper truth. It's not exactly a lie to say, well, we have to leave now if you are leaving, but it's not exactly true either. So I didn't offer either. So he is saying neither answer would have been true, so I didn't offer either answer. Now, if you're interested in English composition, you might want to notice the use of either and neither in this paragraph and keep track. Either is the positive and neither is the negative. And you might want to just get a feel for how those two are used. Also, we have a complicated verb tense. Would have gone unremarked. Would have bruised. Would have been. I actually can't remember right now the name of this, but I know it is a past form that is perfected in the present. So it's some kind of a perfect form, probably. I used to know stuff like this. Okay, let's do one more. I told the patient as simply and directly as I could that we were new students training to be psychologists and that she couldn't join us for that reason. The answer highlighted the distinction between her situation and ours, making the gap between us greater and more evident. The answer was harsher than a well-crafted white lie. But I already had an inkling that untruth, however well meant, can produce unintended consequences. She looked crestfallen and hurt, but only for a moment. Then she understood, and it was all right. That was just how it was. Okay. All right, so he didn't choose to lie to her. He had two options. I can lie or I can tell the truth. A lie would have looked like, we can only take 8 people in our group, or we're leaving the hospital now, so you can't join. The truth was, he told the patient as simply and directly as I could that we were new students training to be psychologists and that she couldn't join us for that reason. So he told the truth, the heart of the matter, simply and directly. He didn't euphemize. He didn't use phrases that would make it seem nice or better. He told it clearly and directly and simply. The answer, what he told her, highlighted the distinction between her situation and ours. So remember, the lie above would have made the status difference go unremarked. But his solution, he made remarks about it and made it seem bigger. It focused on the distinction. It highlighted the distinction between her situation, in other words, the fact that she is a patient, and our situation. We are doctors, training to be doctors. So it highlighted the difference, the distinction, making the gap between us greater and more evident. More evident means more obvious. It shines a light directly at it. The answer was harsher than a well-crafted white lie. A white lie is considered a lie which does no harm, is of very unimportant content, and is told usually for kindness. So typical white lies are things like a woman comes and says, "Do you like my hat?" And you don't like it, but you say, "I like it. It's beautiful." That would be considered a white lie. Or if someone cooks you a meal and you don't really like it, but you say it's delicious, that's a white lie. So white lies are only matters of not importance. You cannot say a white lie about something significant. Like, for example, if you saw someone murder someone, it's not a white lie if you say you didn't see it, because the matter is substantial and important. White lies are only for small matters, always for kindness, and designed not to hurt someone, to spare someone's feelings. So his answer was harsh, harsher. Harsh means hurtful, rough, unkind. So it was harsher. That means it was more unkind than a well-crafted white lie. Well-crafted means you put together the lie carefully so that it was, not going to hurt the person and not going to do any harm at all. A well-crafted white lie. But I already had an inkling that untruth, however well meant, can produce unintended consequences. An inkling is a baby idea, the germ or the seed of a new idea that is not fleshed out, it's not thought out. It's an idea that you haven't had time to really explore, but you sort of feel that this is true. That's an inkling. So I already, at that point in time, he had an inkling that untruth, however well meant, can produce unintended consequences. Untruth means lies. So the main idea being lies can produce unintended consequences. However well meant modifies the lie. A lie, even if you told it to be kind, to try to make someone feel better, even if you had good motives, if you tell the lie, it can produce unintended consequences. So the consequence is the results, the things that come after the lie. Unintended means something you didn't expect or want. So the intended consequence of the white lie would have been to smooth over the social awkwardness and keep the person from joining our group without hurting their feelings. That was the intended consequence. But an unintended consequence of that might be a deepening of their sense of unworthiness, of unloveliness, of rejection. You're not trying to reject them. In fact, you're trying not to reject them. But unintended consequence is that they might go commit suicide because they feel so rejected. So, unintended consequences. So, what was the result? She looked crestfallen. That means, it's like she had hope and then she was deflated. Crestfallen. And hurt. But only for a moment. So it was brief. Then she understood, and it was all right. So this actually did not hurt her deeply. The lie wouldn't have hurt on the surface, but it might have done a deep wound. The truth hurt on the surface, but only a little bit for a second, and did no damage deep down. Once she understood the truth, it was all right. She understood this is just how it is. And people can deal with that. It's not a personal rejection. So we'll stop there with that anecdote. And next week, I think he will probably draw some general points from this. See you next week.